Hello, and welcome to your lecture on agritourism. Agritourism is kind of a vague concept and a little hard to define, actually, but it's derived from this growing desire city dwellers and urbanites and suburbanites to find a sense of connection with their food supply. So it includes interacting with local growers and producers in a variety of ways. It might include growing and harvesting food locally, or producing and selling a local food product, marketing activities around food products that may or may not involve local food, and locations that are rural in characters but are typically at the urban edge so that urbanites and suburbanites have access to local food products. And these facilities may or may not even have agricultural uses on the premises. This is very much connected with the local food movement, as you can tell by my repeated use of the word local food. But it stems from this pervasive interest and growing interest of people to interact with their food supply. And so when you ask people, as the 2007 National Survey on Recreation and the Environment did, why did you visit a ranch, farm, or rural setting? And 46% of people 46% of the time said that they were interested in learning about where their food comes from. 43% of the time, people said it was to watch and participate in farm activities. Around 33% of the time, people said it was to purchase agricultural products or to pick produce. 33% of the time, people said it was to spend the night, and 14% of the time, people said it was to go hunting and fishing. So a lot of these reasons of visiting ranches, farms, and rural settings revolve around this search for engaging with the food supply. And it may just be simply you only like to fish for trout in remote locations. But a lot of the reasons that people are engaging in these behaviors is to feel this connection to this sense of place. In recent decades, this resurgent interest in food has really brought agricultural production into American cities in a way that it had disappeared from them at the end of the 20th century. People these days are looking for this sense of connection to their food supply, sense of connection to their local ecologies, and also this sense of independence from mass-produced food. But they're very much also looking for an experience. This is called agrotourism because a lot of times these visits to dairies and wineries and pumpkin patches are a tourist activity. You get to go and tour a farm. You get to go and engage in some special activity at a ranch or at a winery. And you can think about your own experience if you've ever been to a farmer's market or a community garden. Does it feel different getting your food there from shopping at the grocery store? Do you feel differently about the food you get from the farmer's market or your local co-op? Or if you go on a farm tour, would you cook it and eat it differently? Maybe you feel there's something special about this food in an undefinable way. If you have a favorite wine or beer, maybe you want to visit the vineyard or the brewery that it came from. If you buy raw milk, you might want to visit the farmer and the cows that made the milk. Organic produce lovers want to have the farm-to-table dinners in barns and fields just feet from where the food was grown. And meat lovers want to purchase beef directly from the rancher who raised and slaughtered the animal. Participating in the place where food or agricultural products are made, whether it's through these farm-to-fork dinners or wine tasting events or dairy tours or harvest festivals, is rapidly gaining ground as this leisure activity that Americans produce in. And it's creating a demand in rural communities to cater to agritourism through the development of these activities. So agritourism provides this sense of place and experience and connection for the people who can pay into it, but it also provides an additional revenue stream to the producers who cater to the demand. Now, one question about the development of local food and agritourism is this push in recent years to revive local food economies and to transition away from large-scale agricultural production practices. Superstar chef Dan Barber says that we should go even further, and we don't just need to be local food consumers, but hyper-local. And he uses the example of Iberico ham. If you ever have the privilege to tour the south of Spain, you can go to the cork forests where these pigs are raised. This ham is probably, in my opinion, some of the most delicious in the world, but it's produced in this necessity of adaptations to local ecologies. So generations of cultural adaptations to this landscape in southern Spain have resulted in the mixed cork forest ham production ecology. Now, this is not right for southern Idaho. We have a different climate, but corn farming is also not perfectly suited to the local climate. And so I've asked this question before: what would a truly local cuisine look like for us? And this was representative of changing agricultural practices across the country. Rural economies have really changed in the last 100 years. In 1900, 41% of the workforce farmed. Almost half of everyone employed in the United States was farming. And by 1945, this has dropped to 16%. It's gone down to 4% by 1970. And in 2000, it was just at 2%. At the same time, dramatic increases in farm productivity in the late 20th century, and especially since 1980, means that farm productivity has nearly tripled. And non-farm productivity has also increased by about 75%. So this has really shifted many types of U.S. agricultural production away from the smaller family-owned farms to larger industrialized farming operations. Since farm productivity has increased so much, industrialized agriculture has made food so much more affordable. But it has to operate on a scale that makes agriculture economically unsustainable for small growers who can't produce at the levels of the big growers, meaning their crops cost more, they can't sell it to buyers, and they have to find other ways to make a living. There is growing concern in the U.S. about the lack of young people entering farming as a profession, the lack of young farmers prepared to take up the country's food production. As you can see by this Young Farmers Organizing Handbook, there's been a lot of support to encourage young people to go into farming. But there's also other larger widespread problems to being a small family-owned farm in this otherwise industrialized agricultural economy. It's difficult to hire the labor to grow and harvest produce, like the difficulty finding pickers to harvest the peppers used to make sriracha sauce, even during economic downturns. And there's also ecological consequences of industrial food production, like the loss of soil fertility. So there's a lot of challenges facing these transitions in agriculture, transition away from local farming, and possibly even transitions back to local farming. For those remaining on small family farms, many have stayed successful by developing these alternative sources of income via agritourism. So depending on the location of the farm tours can cost anywhere from $10 to over $100, with some operations offering meals or overnight stays for considerably more. And in many cases, off-farm income for small producers can be upwards of 90% of the household income. So it's not just selling the produce, but it's selling the experience that makes money for these small farmers. Superstar chef Dan Barber has a farm and a farm-to-table restaurant at his location in Blue Hill in upstate New York. If you want to eat dinner there, last time I checked, it was $258 per person, with an optional local wine pairing for an additional additional $168. Now, this is probably actually fairly reasonable for New York, but the diversification of other sources of labor besides farm production means that some people can afford these experiences. So while fewer people work full-time in agricultural production, we are seeing a return to participation in local food production via agritourism. This other photo on the slide is a llama that you can invite to your next Zoom meeting. This animal sanctuary in Silicon Valley called Sweet Farm, if you want to look them up. You may have seen an article about them on Business Insider. It's letting people pay to get llamas, goats, and other farm animals to tune into their video calls for a little under $100. And in just the last month, hundreds of requests for animal cameos and work happy hours and corporate meetings have rolled in and made money for their little company Goat2 meeting. That helps the farm recover some of the revenue it had lost from the new coronavirus lockdown orders. So they're trying, with the restriction of people having to stay at home, loss of agritourism dollars, they're trying to find additional ways to make up for that lost income. And if you look at their website, they say Sweet Farm was designed to connect people to where their food comes from. So rural economies adapt and continue to adapt to the challenges of raising local food. But it's not always easy. As another well-known food writer and contributor, Michael Pollan, says, today the revival of local food economies is being hobbled by a tangle of regulations originally designed to check abuses by the very largest food producers. He says farmers should be able to smoke a ham and sell it to their neighbors without making a huge investment in federally approved facilities. Food safety regulations must be made sensitive to scale and marketplace so that a small producer selling direct off the farm or at a farmer's market is not regulated as onerously as a multinational food manufacturer. This is not because local food won't ever have food safety problems. It will. Only that its problems will be less catastrophic and easier to manage because local food is inherently more traceable and accountable. So as he recognizes, there have been significant obstacles to the growth and proliferation of this type of opportunity of local food production and agritourism. Existing laws to regulate food production and statutory frameworks for food production and agricultural activities were designed to address potential impacts and misbehavior of large-scale agriculture. So a classic example in Michael Pollan's mind is the time he tried to go and buy a local chicken, and the producer said that they had to wait for the mobile processing unit to come by that would meet all of the industrial standards for chicken processing. And this picture is a photo of the Southern Maryland's mobile poultry processing unit that drives around to small-scale farms and helps them process chickens in industrially approved ways. So sometimes applying large-scale regulations to small-scale agriculture may be onerous or even unnecessary. But if you think about, deregulation also carries significant risks. These regulations and statutory frameworks were put in place to keep consumers safe. And if you ever hear a news story about, oh, this product was contaminated by E. coli, that product was contaminated by listeria, these are significant health concerns that can kill people. So it makes sense to regulate food, but just appropriately to the scale of the production. And agritourism is really hard to regulate to make sure that people stay safe, because food safety in agritourism, it varies, the products vary so widely. So food agritourism can involve U-picks, where you go and pick peaches or strawberries or apples, but they might also sell an apple, peach, or a strawberry rhubarb pie baked in the home kitchen. These two types of food products are regulated traditionally regulated differently. A nearby dairy might sell raw and unpasteurized milk directly to consumers, and another farmer down the road might sell self-raised and slaughtered animals to nearby urban customers found through a local listing on a website like Craigslist. And perhaps at the end of the road, there's an organic farm that runs farm-to-table dinners on Saturday nights, where the food is made from organic local food plated adjacent to where the dinners are held. All of these different restaurants and farms and baked goods and meat products, all of these are regulated differently by the Food and Drug Industry. Food and Drug Administration. Should they all be regulated as the same as industrial producers? And what regulation, if any, is necessary to provide safety in these highly varied direct-to-consumer transactions that won't kill this budding industry that may be one of the ways we continue to support small farms? So how do we allow small farms to flexibly meet consumer demands while keeping everyone safe? Small food agritourism operators have engaged in successful efforts to deregulate food agritourism from many of the larger food safety requirements. So, for example, food producers are exempt from many federal food safety requirements at the national levels if they either sell the majority of their food directly to consumers within the state or within a 275-mile radius of where it was produced, and or have less than $500,000 a year of their income come from sales. So if you qualify as a small local grower, you're not subject to the national federal food safety requirements. Now, Michael Pollan or Dan Barber would likely count this as a victory for the local food movement, but I still would encourage you to think about your personal safety. So let's say you or your partner is pregnant, and if you eat food that's contaminated by listeria, you might potentially lose your unborn child or fetus. So think about whether you're willing to take that risk and balance it with the fact that local farms and local households who are dependent on this income are doing what they can to stay in business. And also at the same time, remember, not everyone in the world is trustworthy. So I'm not saying that food producers are out to get you. I'm just saying, if you look around the world across time, there's usually somebody out there who's willing to cut some corners to make a buck. So think about, should the importance of something like food safety be dependent on the size of the production facility, and is it reasonable to assume that local and small scale is synonymous with safe? The Food and Drug Administration states that, a spokesperson states that people have asked me, why do you think that the small guys can be better regulated by state and local regulators in this country? Well, first of all, they're small. There's a pride of ownership there that is real. They raise food. They don't raise a commodity, as happens when the operations get bigger and bigger. And there is a direct consumer relationship with that processor or that farmer that means a lot. And if a mistake is made, which rarely happens, it doesn't impact hundreds of thousands of people. We know exactly where the problem was, and we know exactly how to fix it. The connection with that consumer makes it so that local entities can do that regulation much better than us anyway. So a lot of these adjustments to make agritourism possible for consumers and small-scale producers center around this veneer of health that food agritourism presently enjoys that could very quickly be ruined by just a few bad actors. And so the effort is there to maybe develop regulation that reflects the scale of the production facility so that we allow for industrial agricultural production that makes food available and affordable to most of us, but at the same time allowing these small-scale operations to flourish in the contexts where they can. One possible solution has been to develop food agritourism districts. This is where state statutes could enable areas that wish to engage in and grow food, agritourism, like a lot of operations on the urban fringe, to vote to maybe assess themselves a fee. And that fee then goes into developing this district that is used by a group to maybe upgrade facilities or provide infrastructure to rural areas that makes them even more amenable to urban dwellers interested in food agritourism. So you can see this pamphlet by the Indiana Agricultural Department on planning for agritourism to support these local businesses. There's a lot of challenges and changes in our food supply that were set by the last century that growers and consumers are continuing to navigate. We have a great luxury in knowing or not knowing where our food comes from, who grows it, and how it gets to us. We can know, we cannot know. Agritourism is for the relatively privileged, but for the majority of people, food is usually cheap and safe enough that we don't have to care or know how it's made. However, recent changes in just the last few years have showed just how close many people are to food insecurity. So it's a necessity to eat, and we will have to continue to face these challenges of changing agricultural systems, whether we like it or not. A lot of people have turned towards more home production of food if they can. So growing their own vegetables from seeds or raising chickens in particular has been a run on chickens, meat chickens and layer chickens. As people continue to strive for a sense of food security and knowledge in how they eat. So if you're privileged enough to shop at the farmer's market or a local co-op, or go to a farm-to-table dinner, or visit a winery, or a pumpkin patch, think about what you are trying to get out of that experience, what sources of joy it brings you and why, but also how you're a piece of this larger system of food production and this changing sense of food production in the U.S. That's it for today. Thanks a lot. I hope you have some things to think about, and I look forward to seeing you next time.